Right, guys, welcome back to the final video covering this final outcome in the final part of Year 11. So Unit 2, Outcome 3, Key Knowledge 12. This is all about CSR in staffing. CSR obviously being corporate social responsibility. I don't need to tell you that by now. We've been banging on that about that for quite a while now through various parts of the course, and we will continue to bang on about it during the Year 12 course as well. So CSR and staffing is what we're talking about. Here is our study design, and we can see it sitting right down there at the bottom. So CSR, management considerations regarding the establishment of staffing for business and overseas recruitment. Okay, I'll touch on that in a minute. So, a reminder, CSR, the ethical conduct of a business beyond legal obligations and the consideration of social, economic, and environmental impacts when making business decisions. This idea of going above and beyond legal obligations is really key and really fundamental to this idea of being socially responsible. And that will come out once or twice in the video again as well. So basically what we're saying here is that a business must think about how they're going to demonstrate social responsibility when they're making decisions around staffing, that they must carry out all of their staffing procedures in a ethical, socially responsible manner. And then those considerations must continue throughout an individual's employment with the business, okay, all the way through to when the employee's employment is terminated, which we actually look at in Unit 3. We look at human resource management, and one of the key knowledge dot points there is termination. And again, we look there at how an employee's employment can be terminated in a socially responsible way, or how businesses can demonstrate social responsibility around that phase of employment. So fundamentally, for a business to demonstrate social responsibility in this area of staffing, what it needs to do is develop a diverse, unbiased and supportive work environment and culture where employees feel valued while contributing to the overall success of the business. So that's what's kind of underlying everything that we're about to talk about. Now, what about the overseas recruitment? Remember when we looked at the study design a second ago, it said, and overseas recruitment. Now, this... Look, it used to be a separate key knowledge dot point from CSR, and it gave us a few more details. It just literally said, and overseas recruitment. I'm not quite sure why they've kind of brought it back in and it's just almost mentioned as an afterthought. Look, we're going to really focus on social responsibility in this video. And when we do the assessments, it's going to focus on the social responsibility. But in terms of the recruitment part that's mentioned in the study design, look, if a business is unable to find suitable employees within Australia, so in other words, it can't find people with the right qualifications, the right skills, the right experience, so on and so forth, it then has the option to recruit from overseas. And this goes on a lot. Look, that's how I actually moved to Australia. In 2005, I got a phone call from someone in Australia. They were aware of me. I was working back in London, and that they were looking for recruiters to fill positions in their Australian business. And, cut a long story short, basically, how do you fancy coming and working in Australia? 18 years later, I'm still here. So I was recruited because at that point, there was like a skill shortage in the recruitment industry in Australia. The industry, I think, was going for longer in the UK. There was lots of people working in recruitment. It was kind of a newer industry. It was still been going for a number of years, but it wasn't as established. And actually, once I moved out to Australia working in recruitment, I found that I was surrounded by other POMs that were also coming over or had come over to work in recruitment as well. So when a business is conducting some overseas recruitment, the business also needs to act in a socially responsible way by considering issues that can arise when hiring on a global scale, and not just hiring on a global scale, doing business on a global scale. Any interactions that you might have with other countries, you've always got to build in social responsibility considerations into that. So I'm not going to go any further on that. That's really all we're going to talk about. The overseas side is just making sure you're being social responsible in respect of doing business with other countries, I guess is what we're saying. But we're going to focus on social responsibility here. So what does this mean for where we're going with this video? So what strategies can businesses put in place to make sure that they're demonstrating social responsibility in this area of the business? This area of the business being staffing, setting up your staffing, recruiting, and all that stuff. Okay. So, what strategies? That's really where we go. What you need to know: strategies business can actually do. What can businesses actually do to demonstrate CSR in staffing? So we'll look at some strategies to cover the recruitment and selection of employees through to setting up their employment in the business. Now, we call this the establishment phase of the employment cycle. There's this thing called the employment cycle, okay? There's a picture of it down there with those circles. Establishing, maintaining, terminating. That actually also used to be specified in the study design, not anymore. But basically, establishing is where you're working out what you need, you're going out recruiting and selecting them, and then setting employment business. Then it moves on to maintaining their employment. So the strategy you put in place to look after your staff while they're with you, and then terminating, which is when the employment comes to an end, whether that's the choice of the employee or the employer. Okay, that's the employment cycle. What we're looking at here is the establishing part. Okay, so we're talking about staffing a business that really sits within establishing. And actually, a lot of what we do in units 3 and 4 all fits under maintaining and terminating. Okay, so what strategies can businesses put into place to make sure they're demonstrating CSR during the establishment part of the employment cycle? Now, I'm going to give you a whole bunch of strategies here for the rest of this video. Now, some of them are very specific and some of them are a little bit more general in terms of their nature. But what they all have in common is they are ways in which businesses can demonstrate how they're being socially responsible from a human resources perspective. Okay, this is all about. So, strategy 1. Now, this is kind of broad, but I'm going to break it down into different areas. So, first strategy, ensuring diversity in recruitment and selection. Okay. Now, diversity can be in respect of lots of things. Here's just 5 examples. Okay. So, diversity in gender, diversity in ethnicity, diversity in age, diversity in disability, and diversity in disadvantaged groups. Could mean a lot of things even within itself. So, I'm just going to talk through, diversity in general, but then look at some stuff specifically related to those different categories of diversity as well. So in terms of gender, okay, so a business can demonstrate it's being socially responsible in terms of gender diversity by ensuring a gender balanced workforce is recruited. Taking that further, they can also make sure that management teams at all levels within the business are also gender balanced. Okay, so you obviously would probably pick up on the idea that if we go back, in time, most of the senior positions in businesses were by men. Yeah, that's kind of how the world was. Look, you would argue that's still the case. But if we're talking about being socially responsible, we're going to make sure we've got a good gender balance within our workforce and that each of the different levels of management within the business are also gender balanced as well. So one way that this can be done, so if we're talking about strategies, introducing gender quotas in the business. So a gender quota is basically where it's mandated that a certain number of employees or employees at certain levels within the business consist of each gender. Okay, so a gender quota just kind of guarantees that we have the balance that we're looking for. Okay. Now, Australia has never legislated quotas for women's corporate board representations. We've never put this into law, okay? But there has been a big focus on this within business, particularly large businesses, Australian Securities Exchange listed businesses over the last couple of decades, okay? And there's been a big focus on getting more and more women to kind of progress through and, hit these higher levels, higher positions within business. And there's definitely been some success. I mean, there's a statistic there. So we've seen an increase in Australia in the number of women on ASX 200 boards. So this is the top 200 public listed companies, from 8.3% in 2009 to 34.7% in 2022. That's a huge gain, okay, over a relatively short period of time. And that's awesome. Yeah. Like, so even though we're not legislating for it in Australia, the focus and the work that's being done in the background within businesses is lifting the game. And we're, obviously that's still not a balance, 34.7% is not 50%, but we're definitely well on the way there, okay, which is great. So this seems to be working in Australia. Ethnicity, another form of diversity. So business can demonstrate CSR by recruiting staff from a variety of ethnic backgrounds. Okay, makes sense. Again, ensuring that different ethnicities are sufficiently represented across all levels of staff, just as with gender. Now, in terms of Australia and Australia's progress in this area, look, you could argue that this is maybe, at least there's some evidence out there. Look, all of this is kind of arguable, but there's some evidence out there that we're not doing as well in Australia, perhaps in this area, as we are maybe with gender. Okay, so there's a report here from April 2023. Applicants from ethnic backgrounds, 57% less likely to be considered for leadership roles despite identical resumes, huge study finds. Okay, so this was an article written by an outfit called Smart Company. So they did this, they basically did this test, if you like, piece of research looking at, if even names are going to inhibit people's progression through a company. There's a bit of information you can see there, you could read through to demonstrate. And their study, what they did, they submitted 12,000 job applications to more than 4,000 job adverts, and they changed the name. Left left the CV the same, but just changed the name. And basically, sure, it turned out the more CVs got, accepted or invited in for interview, had like Anglo names than they had names with obviously some kind of ethnic background. So that would suggest that. I mean, there's only one study. There's lots of studies done in this area, but perhaps this is an area in Australia that we're not quite successful in terms of addressing this imbalance as possibly with gender. And then age, diversity, more of the same. So the idea with all of these different types of diversity is to include as broad a range of people as possible, yeah? So for age, businesses rather, can look to recruit underrepresented age groups such as seniors, possibly young adults, Bunnings, and certainly in my class, we've already talked about Bunnings. We did an activity on this. Bunnings are famous for, recruiting, older people, basically. So here's a headline. Again, this is from July 2023, the secret weapon behind the Bunnings workforce. And this is directly quoted from this article, which was in the Sydney Morning Herald. One organisation that understands the value of older workers is Bunnings. So 30% of its store workers are aged over 50. Okay, 14% are over 60. If you put that in the context of retail in general, that's massively different to the landscape that's out there in retail, obviously. Very, very unusual problem, probably actually unique. Okay, so Bunnings chief people officer, which is a weird word of saying human resource, type of human resources. We learned a long time ago that these team members play an integral role in creating a great place to work and providing our customers the best experience, this guy says. They often have significant life, industry, and trade experience, which makes them a wealth of knowledge for our customers and our wider team. Absolutely makes sense, yeah? They bring to the table a wealth of knowledge and experience that younger people just don't, just because they've not been around as long. It's as simple as that. And if you think about Bunnings, the business they're in and the trades, there's definitely some value to that. So the strategy that they actually employ, or part of the strategy, because this is all about strategies, to make sure that this kind of works for them, they adopt a kind of more flexible recruitment process. So including accepted resumes being dropped in store by walk-ins. So that's good for those that are not, the older generation and perhaps not as tech savvy as the younger people. Job ads on posters, videos featuring stories of some of its longer tenured team, this sort of thing. Basically, what we're saying here, this doesn't happen by accident in Bunnings. They actively put in place strategies that attract, the older generations to apply and make it easy for them to do so as well. So these are the actual strategies they're putting into place. In terms of disability, diversity of disability, look, consider disabled applicants and don't just automatically preference able-bodied candidates. Ensure premises have disability access, such as ramps and lifts and that sort of thing, to make sure that individuals with disability can actually enter the facilities to attend interviews and then, of course, actually work there. So again, this is strategies you can put in place to help, make diversity in terms of disability kind of more a thing that you're able to do. Disadvantaged groups. So this is a tough one to do, but you can demonstrate CSR by recruiting staff from disadvantaged backgrounds, for example, refugees, homeless individuals, that sort of thing. At the very least, as with all the other categories, ensure that your recruitment and selection processes are not biased against people from these backgrounds. Okay, so it might be hard to be particularly proactive in that area, but at least make sure we're not biased against. Okay, so at least we're kind of going part way there to be socially responsible. Okay, so this is the Victorian government, Victorian Labor government, is getting involved in pushing for diversity in this area. Given the Chance is a organisation, Brotherhood of St Lawrence Social Enterprise, that provides supported recruitment to allow employers to secure more diverse source of labour, and it basically hooks up people with more disadvantaged backgrounds to kind of get into work, basically. So businesses can kind of hook into this program, and then you're going to get candidates from a broader range of backgrounds than you might otherwise. And it says they're refugees, asylum seekers, people with disability, again, so on and so forth. So there's an example. And look, social enterprises. We looked at social enterprises earlier in the year in a type of business. And look, there's now hundreds and hundreds of these. It's a huge, huge industry. And very often their focus is on a particular group, the disadvantaged population. So Cafe on the Park here. These are all Victorian ones. A social enterprise, the catering industry, provides training for people wanting to enter the workforce. So this is kind of like long-term unemployed people in terms of being the disadvantaged group. Social Foundry, again, their focus is on youth, work skills community, marginalised youth are their focus, and so on and so forth. There's lots and lots of social enterprises, and they very often exist to support a particular part of the marginalised community. So that's strategy one. Okay, that's all about diversity. Strategy two. Okay, now moving on to a different area. So this is all about putting in place policies to actually support employees. Okay, so what we mean here is putting in place policies that support employees through their time with the business. Okay, now putting in place to support employees, it doesn't sound like rocket science. Well, why would we not do that? That's obvious, yeah. But the reason that sits under social responsibility is because a business doesn't have to do these things. And we're going to give you some specific examples in a minute. Business doesn't have to do these things. And that's what makes it being socially responsible, okay? If a business is going to implement the stuff that we're going to talk about, they're going above and beyond legal requirements. That's what makes it socially responsible. Remember, that's a key part. If you're ever defining social responsibility, part of your definition has to include this idea of going above and beyond what is legally required. And that's why these things are providing support to employees. You don't have to provide support to your employees. I mean, it would be pretty bad business to not, but it still sits within social responsibility because you don't have to. And if you're doing it, you're going above and beyond what legally you have to do. Now, there is also, though, a very direct and very real benefit to be gained if a business does these things and if they do them well. And that is staff attraction and staff retention. Okay, so this is like the side benefit. And look, if you were cynical, you could say the reason that businesses do the things we're about to talk about is purely to attract the best staff and to retain the best staff. Perhaps, look, I'm sure there's an element of both, but certainly, even if it's that's not the primary reason behind businesses doing this stuff, it's certainly one of the benefits that they're going to see from doing it. So, specific policies or processes that the business can put in place. Flexible working arrangements. Now, this does sit in the national employment standards. Okay, so businesses do have a legal commitment to provide this to a certain extent, but business can go above and beyond that and put in stuff much far more broad reaching or far reaching kind of flexibility than is legally required. So this is all about recognising the personal and family commitments of employees, the caring responsibilities, etc. You can refer back to your notes on the National Employment Standards. This is all about offering work-life balance. Okay, so work-life balance is a huge thing, has been now for a while in business. Employers recognise that if you want a happy workforce, if employees feel that they have a good work-life balance, there's more chance that's going to happen. Okay. Flexible working hours, adjusted working hours, remote working, working from home. Obviously, working from home since COVID has become a huge thing. And a lot of businesses now have actually been struggling to get their employees back into the office. And extended parental leave and other types of leave. So in the National Employment Standards, we looked at the different types of leave. You could offer more than you legally have to under those National Employment Standards. Second thing that you could do in this area is offer employee assistant programs, EAPs. These are pretty common now, particularly if you work for any large business Australia, there's always going to be an EAP offered. So this is basically a counselling service. So it's funded by the employer, so it's free access for the employees. And it's a counselling service made available to all employees and often even close family members as well, because this actually can extend beyond the employee. And this offers confidential assistance and counselling, not just for work-related problems, but if it extends into their personal lives. So if there's health issues, family issues, alcohol, gambling, family violence, any of this sort of stuff. So it's basically if anything's going in your life and you want to access counselling, this is about the business offering a free counselling service. Some of these, like particularly large businesses, might actually have their own internal EAP. It would still be confidential for employees, but other businesses, there's like EAPs that exist that other businesses can basically buy their services from. So the key here is, again, social responsibility. There's a cost to doing this, and it can be a pretty significant cost. Businesses don't have to do this, but by doing this, they're demonstrating social responsibility because they're supporting their employees. And because it's not just work-related issues, that idea of social responsibility extends even further with this. Another strategy, offering a really thorough induction process. Now, this is a bit similar, providing support to employees. Now, you know what induction is because we've already looked at that a video or two ago. And the reasons we do a induction now. But if you think about it, an employee that has gone through a really thorough induction process is much more likely to feel supported, particularly in their early days of employment, than if that has not happened. So although we already know that what an induction is, how it can be done, and why it needs to be done, this also now filters through to us, to our social responsibility, because, the depth of the induction process, how thorough the process is, how long it takes, again, legally, there's no rules around this, but and also there's a cost to doing it. So it sits under social responsibility, because if we're going to invest in a really thorough induction process for all of our employees, it demonstrates to them on the way that they're going to be supported. They're going to feel much more supported in the early days, which is they're going to filter on to later on in their employment. So this is actually a way that businesses can demonstrate social responsibility just by doing a really good, thorough induction with their new employees. All right, strategy 3. So moving on to our third, I think, final area, encouraging community involvement. Now, businesses do not operate in isolation, okay? They form part of the community in which they operate or which they're based, okay? So one way for businesses to demonstrate social responsibility is to give back to that community in some way, okay? One way to achieve that end is to actively encourage employees who work for the business to volunteer in community projects. Now, look, there's lots of different ways in which businesses can demonstrate CSR in their community. I mean, they could sponsor local events, for example, donate money, lots of different ways. But remember, this is about the establishment phase of the employment cycle, or recruitment and selection, staffing a business. So those things wouldn't be relevant in the context of staffing a business. So in the context of staffing, this is how the business can demonstrate social responsibility. So actively encouraging employees to volunteer in community projects. Oops. Now, remember the national employment standards, okay? There was a standard in there, standard 7, which mentioned what is focused on community service leave. So that standard said, and I'm just basically taking this straight from the video where we looked at those, employees, including casuals, can take leave for activities such as voluntary emergency management activities, blah, blah. You can read the rest. So this is actually written into legislation, okay? So the government does legislate for this to a point, because it doesn't say how much or anything, it's one of those quite vague ones. But a business can demonstrate social responsibility by actually actively promoting and encouraging this amongst their workforce, maybe even going as far as connecting people in the workforce to local community projects and programs, and then encouraging their employees to go and take, a day, a year, a day, a month, whatever it is, and go out and work in the community. Okay, so that's how the business is demonstrating CSR, by kind of taking this standard 7 in the national employment standards and really kind of pushing it, and again doing more than what is legally required under those standards. So really promoting and really getting your employees to go out and do this. So that's another strategy businesses can use to demonstrate their CSR as it relates to staffing. So just summarizing all of this stuff, right? Because kind of talked about a lot of different things there. If you're asked about, excuse me, considerations management need to think about in terms of being socially responsible with regard to their staffing processes, something like that, your options are now. Okay, number 1, ensuring diversity in recruitment and selection. And then you could talk more specifically if you wanted to, with regards to those different categories, gender, ethnicity, so on and so forth. And you could talk about a few specific things that businesses can put in place to address some of those things, as we talked about earlier. Second one, putting in place policies to support employees, such as the 3 that I talked about there, offering flexible workplace arrangements, EAPs, setting up thorough induction processes. And thirdly, promoting, encouraging employees to become involved in community volunteering. So that's just kind of a summary of the actual strategies that we covered in this video. And that is that. So that's it for this video. And that is also it for Unit 2. So look, hopefully we'll see most of you back in for Unit 3 next year in Year 12. If not, good luck. Either way, good luck with Year 12. Cheers for now.